Okay, so good morning. My name is Mikko Dufva. I currently work at VTT for still today and tomorrow. I'm also in a kind of a transition of work phase myself. I'll start at Sitra on Monday. But I'm going to talk about future work in the digital world. And as Martti said, this is based on work we've done in Platform Value Now project. As well as projects I've done for the Prime Minister's office, which have guided the government report on the future, which is also on the topic is also future work. And this future work, this is all over the place. This discussion, so this is a hot topic and for a good reason. These are kind of the headline version of the future work. There's a lot of this kind of hype. Some of it, there's some, for example, in the automation, there's kind of nothing new. We've been talking about how robots, whatever that means, will take over our jobs. Now the new thing is that also knowledge workers are afraid of their jobs because of advancements in deep learning and other AI stuff. Another thing that's now kind of more current is the whole platform economy, this new way of organizing work and economic activities, and this also raises both concerns but also opportunities on the future of work. So, in a nutshell, why work is changing? One thing is, of course, this digitalization. And I'll come back to that. Another thing is globalization, and this was kind of the main emphasis just a little while ago, talking about this global value networks, etc. Now it's more on the background, but the issues are still I think valid. We are in a kind of global market, and then in Finland and in other Western countries, the question of aging population is, of course, another thing that will shape work. Going to more to the digitalization and more to the platform economy. In the Platform Value Now project, we have looked at different phenomena related to platforms and kind of different, let's say, narratives that we tell ourselves about how the platform economy might develop. And here is one categorization of these developments. So one is the whole IoT, 5G, this intelligence going first from computers to mobile phones, so all this mobile stuff, but then thanks to IoT and others, to our environment, so we have a more intelligent environment. And just as it would be strange to think about some platform services without if we wouldn't have a smartphone, then also this IoT, there's a kind of a promise of new kinds of services that can be thought of. Then another thing is, of course, the data. Everybody talks a lot about data gathering, and then luckily now also about what do we want to do with the data, and not just how do we gather data. Then the third interesting thing is the whole kind of distribution and decentralization discussion around platform economy. So how do these new digital platforms, how do they disrupt the kind of the existing, especially the top-down models, or do they just replace it with another top-down models? So there's a kind of a narrative of decentralization and distribution so far about value creation, so that everybody can kind of create value in a platform, but also increasingly on value sharing. And for example, platform cooperatives are an example of how do we share the value that is created in platforms in new ways. Of course, cooperatives then, are nothing new, but then applied to the whole platform scene. There's something interesting there. And then finally, something that's hasn't received as much attention perhaps, but is kind of implicit, is that how do we behave in this new digital economy, digital world or platform economy? What are the habits, the best practices? And usually this has gotten to the head to news based on that some platform has done something wrong. For example, Uber has done something wrong, and then we'll start discussing on what would be the good ways to behave in a platform economy. But perhaps a more proactive discussion is emerging.
Can you tell us what is DAO? Martti
Yes,
did not know
yes.
it.
All right.
And neither I.
Very good question. There's a whole lot of different technologies and other stuff listed there. DAO is distributed autonomous organizations.
I should have known that.
So an
Now
organization, or let's call it an organization, which is based on smart contracts, which are based on blockchain.
Yes.
And so there is at least one example, and also there you have the kind of question about habits and practices. So there was a kind of a investment organization based on Ethereum blockchain and smart contracts, which means that there's no central player in control, so it's totally distributed based on consensus mechanisms. There was a kind of a bug in one of the contracts which allowed the user to transfer most of the funds to a subcontract, and which he then controls. And what do you do in this situation? Because this was kind of against the idea of the whole organization. So you shouldn't be able to just grab all the money and run. So there was a whole discussion that how do we deal with it? Can we transfer this transaction back? Because basically blockchain is supposed to be immutable, but of course you can transfer the. Yeah. In the end, it resulted in a fork. So there's now two versions of the organization. And
but anyway, it's part of the story of potentially new types of organizations or ways of work emerging that are much more distributed and autonomous and not based on central control and bit speculative, but that there are a few examples like that now.
Yeah.
Okay, now I recognize. Sorry that my brain didn't work fast enough, but I have heard of it before.
And still a bit more generally on the kind of the context of when we're talking about kind of new ways of working and new forms of work and what we mean by work, and which also means that we have to come up with very clever policy actions. But what is the context in which we have to come up with all these actions, policy actions, but also how do we shape work in organizations? So you could kind of summarize that there's these three types of crises also, which are related to this same transition, that is the transition to the new ways of working. There's of course the economic crisis, even though the kind of the economy is now recovering, it's still there's some structural changes that are probably a bit problematic. There's a talk about the crisis of politics, or how do we kind of rethink democracy? How do we reinvent or invent new ways for people to really have their voice heard. And then, of course, the environmental crisis, climate change, land degradation, all of these things which will also influence the way we work. I did a study where we looked at around a bit over 70 reports on the future of work, mostly Finnish reports, to find out that, okay, what has been said about the future work. And our initial goal was to find different scenarios, different kind of visions of what the future work might be. We didn't find at first we thought that everybody still thinks the same, that there's just one version, usually a version where robots take over. But we did find two kind of discussions going on. So one is the discussion on meaningful work and kind of rethinking what work itself means. So work is redefined as an interaction between people, or problem solving between people. And this is a more kind of a supply side emphasis. It doesn't actually say anything about what do we do. The other is more short-term oriented and focused on productivity. And this does say something on what sectors will grow or decrease, etc. But it doesn't really say much about the way individuals work, or it is not interested in the meaningful work as such. These are not necessarily in conflict, but these are separate discussions. So now we've been trying to find a kind of a bridge across this chasm. The government report on the future, the first part came out this spring, and there's 5 different changes that kind of summarize the whole future of work, or the disruption of work topic, because the future of work is a rather wide thing. So one is the employer-employee relationship. What do we mean by an employer, and what do we mean by employee in a digital economy, a platform economy? The other is the new contents, new ways of working, new ways of organizing. Third is the skills that we need. And I'm going to focus on mostly on these 3 in this presentation. There's also the question of livelihood. Where do we get the money? Because in the future there will be work, but the question is who will pay for it. And then the 5th is more on the kind of the identity side. We define ourselves largely based on our kind of work, or it's something that we feel that, okay, well, now we are part of society where when we do something, we work. That's one way to link to society. If the work changes drastically, what does it mean for this societal cohesion? So first, the employer-employee relationship. Now we categorize workers mainly to that you're either kind of traditionally employed, or then you're an entrepreneur, or then you're unemployed. But in the future, there might be a lot of workers who don't nicely fit into these categories. There might be the pensioner freelancers, or then there might be some project nomads. And especially platform economy is something that really models the borders, so to speak. So do we need a kind of a third category, or do we need lots of different categories and ways of working? There's new words like the light entrepreneurship, they use, and others that are kind of trying to rethink what this new forms of self-employment or entrepreneurship could be. Institute for the Future did a couple of years ago on report on this, especially on ways of working in platforms. So kind of diversifying the discussion that you're from the are you an employee or are you an entrepreneur to, let's say, 7 different options. You can be a kind of a freelancer, you can be a part-time employer, you can be what they call a hustler who basically tries to just monetize every platform that he or she can find. And what
May I
this
ask something?
Yep.
I hear in Silicon Valley they talk about hustlers, and is hustler positive or negative term in yours? Is it kind of a future worker or is it kind of a, how do you?
We did a kind of a Finnish version of it to our report, and let's say it depends on your viewpoint if it's a positive or negative. It basically is just trying to find the loopholes in platforms. So in a collective sense, that's probably not the best thing to do. But then again, from the individual's point of view, it was a kind of a positive story, or we put a positive spin to it. So it depends on the viewpoint. Not necessarily the kind of the best practice way of working in platforms, I would say.
But in Silicon Valley they say that okay, you should be a hustler there, and
Yeah.
so. But you don't think a hustler is a glue that creates glue between the people, that it kind of networks and creates glue. But you think it's more like taking advantage of the loopholes or someone.
Yeah, well, that was the approach we took. It can be, of course, this more of a, let's say, a champion of and a gatherer type of figure. But we had another persona story that fulfilled that role. But it's this also points out the fact that the drawing of boundaries is not that clear in this. So. Person who just hustles around different platforms can be a positive asset to the community. Point.
So there are different stories again that diverge, and we don't have labels. So I guess somebody can be hustling if the person is sort of collecting other people for some job and takes a bit of leadership and sort of creatively and imaginatively puts together whatever temporary organizations to get something done and reaps a bit of excess value out of that. So is this a positive or negative story? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
So again, we are not coming to the modern work environment. There's no good or bad. Like I learned a few weeks ago, somebody HR person said that nowadays we tend to think that there's not good or bad, but kind of things are happening, and so we don't put labels. Is that kind of idea?
well, it may be too early to do that, and certainly the labels are viewpoint dependent. I sort of sympathize with the idea that people creatively and imaginatively make use of whatever technical platforms and find solutions and sort of add value from their creativity. But from somebody else's angle, that's exploitation. So. So difficult to make final judgments.
Yeah, put the label. Is it good or bad? I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we focus on putting the label good or bad, or then trying to figure out if this is an entrepreneur or employee, it kind of it diminishes the discussion, and probably we miss some new opportunities. So now I think it's still a good time to have this discussion that, okay, what type of personas do we want, and what are the good practices that we want in a platform economy, and then have the question of what is good and what is bad.
this desire to labeling, of course, comes from the fact that now our social security systems and the full gamut of those are based on these distinctions. That if you are if you are an employee, then it's a certain system that works. If you are an entrepreneur, that's another. But if you fall in between those two, then you sort of also fall in the cracks of the of health insurance and all sorts of benefit systems, and that creates now causes grey hairs to people who are supposed to think about the future of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
There's now a committee, I understand, between different ministries that's trying to figure out what to do with the social security at the face of something like the story you are shown.
Yeah. The whole kind of legislative implications of platform economy or sharing economies. It's a whole topic in itself. But it was a good signal that this is now being discussed and also cross ministries. So
yes.
I think Finland, we are not in the worst position at least. So now on to the second part, the kind of the new ways of working. Of course, the whole digital technologies, these are very much part of our everyday work life already. But what might be coming in the future work? One is the kind of that we can have new ways or other ways of organizing work than a kind of a typical hierarchical organization, which we are very much used to. And for example, here is one organization chart of a company. As you can see, probably not a very hierarchical organization, but this is from a Morning Star named company which makes tomato-based produce. So it's actually a process factory, and each dot is a person, and the lines represent different commitments that they have done, that they have agreed to amongst themselves. So this is a kind of a web of commitments, and this is also in kind of constant flux. So if I'm not happy with my position, I can start negotiating with others that, okay, would you want to have this task, and I can take some other task, etc. And you can see that some people have kind of a more central role than others. So this doesn't mean that there are no kind of hierarchies implicit in this, but it's just that this is a whole new way of organizing work. And of course, conflicts arise. What do they do when they can't complain to the boss because there is no boss? Someone might have some kind of a coordination role, but not really a kind of a traditional boss role. So they have a agreed set of steps that they take to resolve the conflict, and it's basically what you do in a kind of among group of friends. How do you agree on things? Some might have a more kind of a central role in saying that, okay, or suggesting that we do this and this and this, but they are at least usually not that strict power kind of positions.
May I ask again?
Yep.
Yeah. And now that Yrjö is also here, and we saw the publication of the book, was it Ala-Pietilä, and about the Nokia history and
today's news, yes.
Yes.
yeah, and then which I've been thinking, and also maybe we lived same time at VTT at one point, and they became very 2005. We took very strong matrix organization into use in VTT, and now this book says that okay, that was the failure for the Nokia, the matrix organization. I did find it very challenging, the matrix organization, and a lot of overhead. So I'm now wondering that is this a new matrix organization, or is this a real new thing? Some people think, and they went back that okay, let's have a more like a good business unit. I see that looks almost like a Vincent to me, which I heard was very impressive to see how Vincent works. So maybe it is, but also I'm skeptic that is this new matrix organization.
I would say that this is not a new matrix organization. Again, I don't want to. I haven't worked in this kind of. They call these holacracies, so self-organizing organizations. What studies have shown that usually those who work in these kind of organizations tend to be more satisfied with their work. It of course might be that those who don't want to work in this kind of organization, it's very easy also to leave this kind of organization.
If I continue a bit about what, because yesterday night Martti and myself, we were in a party, but on my way home I read the first news of that book, and after an hour it was changed. So it contained a lot more information than what Helsingin Sanomat said today. So it was shortened. But what the part that was taken away was that it, like the R&D, was kind of too centralized, and there was and the leadership was changing too fast. So they tried to keep too much at the top level and not give power to those who really know. That was kind of the critique, but that disappeared. It was not in today's new Helsingin Sanomat anymore. But that's probably in the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this resembles anyway what I understand of how some companies like Futurize or perhaps work. That there's fair bit of autonomy to the people to find the way they deal with projects, and still they of course have projects, and projects have due dates and whatnot, and budgets. So probably it ends up a little bit different kind of image, but
yeah. And if you're interested in this type of organizing organizations, the book by Lalu, The Reinventing Organizations, has other examples. For example, one Italian car part manufacturer is also kind of one thing that I wouldn't think of finding this one. And then, of course, what's been in the news a lot is the Dutch Boersorg. It's on the health care sector, and kind of having these autonomous teams that decide how the work is done, and of course there's some boundaries set by the organization kind of collectively, but in many cases, for example, the employees decide their salaries among themselves. It's also kind of interesting idea compared to what the situation is now. If this the kind of the web of commitments, the last example was that you still have a kind of you still have a company, and you still have an organization with more or less clear boundaries that you can say that okay, I work in this company. You can also have the organization as more as a kind of service. And we see examples of these expert networks or consultant networks. There are 3 different Finnish platform companies, as an example. Solved connects experts to connects experts and makes teams to solve very big problems. Skillhive is basically doing the same, talking about swarm work, where the metaphor is more that okay, you have this swarm of workers or experts, and they go around one issue and solve it, and then move to another. And then GoCo uses the term team economy, and it's more or less same thing. I think they would be furious if I say that they are doing the same thing, but anyhow, to my eye, it's similar. But what's also interesting is that okay, you can have the organization, all the kind of the services that the organization provides. You can kind of outsource the whole organization, but also that it goes beyond it. For example, the GoCo is planning on having kind of this open CV or record of what you have done. And so if you have kind of this open and reliable record on everything you have done, possibly also everything you have learned or studied, you can. It's very useful in this type of work where you then have to think about, okay, who to get into this to do this task. If you have this open, reliable, searchable database of things that people have done, and this might be a interesting thing that also transforms the way we work. I mentioned platform cooperatives, so this is also, let's say, an old way of working that now is there are new examples of it, and digital platforms make it perhaps more scalable. These still have a tendency to be more local. But for example, Green Taxi Co-op is basically Uber, but co-op, so owned by the drivers. And Loconomics is a platform that tries to make it easy for local businesses to do business together and with the local customers. So it tries to create these local economies. And there's a platform cooperatives consortium which tries to promote this way of working or organizing. This is still kind of more in the margins when thinking about platform economy, but there are more and more examples. They are rather recent examples, so it's hard to say if this will actually fly. But it has, I feel, the potential to really change the way also value is distributed. Then another thing is there's a lot of talk about commons and what type of commons should we have. Usually it's more about the knowledge commons. This is also let's say Silicon Valley based view. So they are, for example, thinking about what kind of education should be as a commons, which would, in Finland, because we have education as a commons, is not necessarily where the focus is. But there's other things like what data should be either openly available, so free to do whatever, or then more like public, offered by the public sector and perhaps with some restrictions, or then what type of community you have around some commons, with basically controls the way it is used, and which are the private assets. And there's a lot of talk about this peer-to-peer economy that's built around, upon this idea of commons. This is still, I feel, in more abstract level, but interesting nonetheless. Another thing that's related to this, and what Institute for the Future is trying to promote, is this idea of universal basic assets. So not universal basic income, which is just focused on money, but this universal basic assets. What are the commons that should be available to everyone, so that everyone can kind of have the basic building blocks to create a new profession or create work for himself or herself. And yeah, we had we also mentioned blockchain. I think something similar to blockchain will be a very kind of a big thing in the future. Probably not the blockchain as we know it now, because it has some scaling issues and also energy use issues. But if we, there are solutions and other ways of basically doing the same, which require less processing power and thus less energy, and then you could have a kind of a blockchain-based application on your smartphone, which will also be a kind of a game changer. But what is interesting here is that, one, there is no kind of middleman, which is again this whole idea of very decentralized organization, or let's say a network, because in contrast to these holacracies or self-organizing organizations, it is more open. It's just a kind of a if you agree to work with these kind of rules and with this kind of culture, you're free to kind of join the network. Another thing is that blockchain itself doesn't really make a difference if you're a kind of a man or machine, and especially the visions that some of the, say, people that are developing Ethereum or others have, is that you have a, for example, a self-driving car, and you can get on that car and pay with some cryptocurrency, and it goes to the car's account. And once the car finds out that, okay, I need service, it goes to the service station by itself and then pays for the service with this cryptocurrency, etc. So there is no need for anybody to own the car. So the car can own itself, and this really will, or I don't know if anything like this will happen, but it really kind of models the boundaries between a worker, because we now think of worker as a human being. But, well, is it then just a machine, or is it a worker or driver or whatever? There are also ideas that you could, the IoT will merge with, let's say, trees in a park, and when I walk in the park, the trees will I'll have to pay the trees a bit for their services, and also the trees will then maintain themselves. Or if you have an internet-connected toaster with some processing power, what prevents it from trading in the stock market and actually being more wealthy than I am? So these kind of, say, these are just thought experiments to kind of provoke what might be possible in the future, but
all this shows that Douglas Adams was very clever.
yes. Yeah.
Over the years, I have found that much of the stuff that we now work on has been anticipated by his books. I hope you have all read them. If not, hurry and do so.
Yeah. But one issue here is that it kind of it makes the code as the law. So what is coded is the way how things work. And for example, in the DAO example, it's things don't always work out well when there are humans also involved. Okay. Then something on skills. There's lots and lots of lists on the skills of the future. There's one thing in common to them is that they all talk about kind of this, let's say, abstract skills. There's very little substance skills that you should learn this and this topic, but it's more about how you learn. So you have to learn how to learn. This is by the World Economic Forum, and this is more recent by UK think tank Nesta, and you see this active learning, and so you have this. Basically, you have to learn how to learn. You have to learn how to interact with people, and you have to learn how to understand complex systems and complex wholes. What is perhaps interesting to me is that where do we learn these skills of self-organizing and kind of life management? In much of the discussion in platform economy, for example, is that the the worker has a lot of more responsibility of his or her actions. So so you have to find your own work. You have to create your own work. You have to be fluent in networks, etc. And so where do we gain these skills, and how do we learn how to learn, and how do we actively update our skills? It's something that's not discussed as much, but as perhaps is needed, because these kind of skills, life management skills, and the kind of continuous learning, and also the ability to unwind, are important for well-being in the future. So these skills are directly connected to that.
Yes, if you look at the previous list, just bring it back if you don't mind, that there are a bunch of stuff on these least important skills that we nevertheless think that some of them are quite crucial for physical well-being.
Yeah.
So here we go.
And if you think, if you're interested in where do this come from, this is from UK statistic categories that they used. So I was, for example, this night vision is interesting. But you have night vision.
I guess
but of course, it's a statisticians have there's a whole history of things that are there. It's a interesting report. Kind of mixes expert judgment with this machine learning algorithm. So they use that to process through a lot of data.
Is that to survive in daily life or in professional life? I'm surprised, very surprised on the night vision skill. That really surprises me that I
This is on the
place.
Yeah, this is on the professional skill. So you think about what type of professions there will be in the future. What type of skills do you need for those professions?
Okay.
So for the professions of the future, according to this study, you don't need night vision. There are no kind of there are very few jobs where you need night vision in the future.
And then the next slide, which I did find very nice way of crystallizing things, and fully agree. But where is this coming from? Is this some kind of a, where have you kind of concluded yourself, or is kind of a some kind of a,
let's say this is partly what we want to emphasize. This comes up in some of the reports on meaningful work. And where they discuss skills in the future, and then also the kind of the reports that very much focus on the well-being or welfare of workers. But this was something that we wanted to highlight because we feel that this hasn't been discussed as much.
Sorry. We have a question regarding the skills.
Yep.
But what about the human abilities? Let's speak about their right brain or left brain categories that they made regarding the human, that how they match with these skills, or that there are some ideas that you should put more emphasis on the skills that the future computers are not able to do that. While the skills which they are set here, mostly, I suppose, they can be done by computers and machines also.
Yeah, these are usually based on this idea that that what can be automated will be automated, and then what is left and what kind of skills are needed for those. It doesn't really start from what do people want to do usually. Also, it's understandable. You would have to have a kind of a large survey on that, and then again, what people want to do. Is probably not something that that will exist in the future, and also these kind of treat workers as very kind of standard, so no distinction on human characteristics or traits or temper or anything like that. They are just kind of lists of what kind of skills are probably needed in the future. Then I'm a futures researcher, so I'm also interested in kind of what kind of images are guiding our this change and what do we think what do we think might happen in the future, because it's always kind of we tend to emphasize some things and not other things, while both things might be possible. So what might be these images of future that are currently perhaps more dominant? One is this, also again coming more from Silicon Valley, these ideas of transhumanism and singularity. So transhumanism is basically how do we use technology to evolve the human species, live longer, live healthier, gain new abilities. And this is usually thought, those who like to think about these things are people with a lot of money and some time, and basically who are kind of well off. You don't see transhumanism that much in, let's say, rural Africa or somewhere like that. So it's a kind of a image of it's more, say, their image of future, but it's pervasive in that we tend to think how can we be more kind of efficient and more skillful and kind of evolve ourselves. And then, of course, this technological singularities is something that guides the, let's say, techno-optimism that soon everything will be possible. Of course, you can take the more dystopian view that soon there will be robot overlords ruling everything. So there are two flavors to that. This is something that's more on the background. Then when you come to the disruption of work or future of work, there is this fable of full automation, and this idea that everything that can be automated will be automated. And this was from a tweet I saw that Der Spiegel's the covers from different eras are rather similar. So this fable has been going on for a while, which doesn't mean that it wouldn't be true. So bear that in mind. But it also reflects our kind of fear of being replaced. And while I do think that I don't want to do the job of a robot. I don't want to do kind of a repetitive stuff, whether it's manual or whether it's kind of some thinking stuff or more cognitive stuff. For example, filling out the timesheet or something like that, filling out databases, etc. So I'm happy to give away those tasks. But then, when we're talking about how do we, for example, create these healthcare robots that will replace nurses, I'm having kind of trouble understanding why do we want to replace nurses. I understand if there's a kind of a logistic robot or something that will help nurses and help them to kind of focus more on the patients, but I feel that there is this kind of a tendency to think about, okay, well, what do we automate next then, and not think about do we actually want to automate it. I'm an engineer, and thus I really like technology and believe in the opportunities that technology proposes. So I think that a lot can be automated. Also, I feel that perhaps not everything that can be automated should be automated.
Yeah. There was also an article in Helsinki almost a year or so ago. It was an article 50 years ago that stated that teachers will be replaced by the robots and computers. and it was like a positive thing that
Yeah.
in a couple of years we will have robots replacing teachers. And I think every one of us now thinks that it's not a positive, and it won't happen probably. Of course, computers are. Or the whole idea how to use digitalization in schools has transformed during these decades, and I think in many cases that will be the same. One comment because in the beginning you have these major trends, kind of digitalization was one of the big trends, but actually it's the people are behind that.
Yes.
So
exactly.
it's the trend is that people want to develop and make life easier,
Yeah.
and kind of that continues all the time.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of the same.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When there's kind of a headline that robots will replace you, it's actually that a person has decided that a robot will replace you, or an algorithm.
Yeah, this is a fact that I haven't checked really properly, but everybody knows the story about the machine that plays chess. So chess machines now beat human players, but actually there's also a competition of like a team competition.
Yeah.
And the best chess player actually is a team of several people and several computers.
Yeah.
That has worked out sort of how to play chess as a team, and that is the current unbeatable master of everything. So perhaps there is a bit of hope for humankind, but it's kind of more playful. I would like to see a more playful future where people learn how to engage with robots and do things that are unanticipated things and whatever it is. So there are but that is yet another fable, of course, yet another narrative that we can try to tell ourselves about the more positive.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I've been wondering about that. It's nice when you said that be afraid of being replaced. Yeah, maybe that's a difficulty. But I was very surprised, for example, Hyppönen, he's always interviewed, and he was saying that, oh yeah, AI is coming and we should be afraid that. So I was very surprised that even he's kind of saying this very popular way of. But I'm a big believer in robots, and I'm waiting when I'm old and I have a robot at home. I really believe I like to talk to the robot. Of course, real person is better, but there's not always a real person. So I truly believe that it's nice to talk to, and I think there's a proof already that people like to do a lot of proof. One was this. What was the thing that you played? The small taco. What was the
Tamagotchi.
Tamagotchi. So that proves already that. It was very pathetic, but people like to play and take care of that. But think about a real robot, you can talk.
Yeah.
But another proof now that AI is really, soon people will like to have AI rather than human. That's when you call a service. It's much better to have an AI in the other end of the service line, because the AI remembers all your history, even after fifth stupid question, it's always kind to you. Human is able to be kind only 5 times, and otherwise you get frustrated. So I think soon we learn, very soon, that actually no, I prefer to have the AI in the other end than a human, and so it's happening. I think also the positive, but it's interesting that there's so much people are afraid about that.
Yeah.
I'm surprised on that.
Yeah. Actually, on that note, I think this is two things. I think this is a kind of a discussion that's good to have now. That what are the kind of things that we want to automate? What are the AI services that we want? In our previous project, we did a kind of a drama workshop where there was one scene where there's an elderly person and then another one, and then during the scene you find out that okay, that's a robot that the elderly person is talking to, and then the robot malfunctions and is carried away, and etc. Afterwards, we have a kind of a discussion that okay, how did you feel? And some people find that very kind of comforting, that there's something that the elderly person can talk to, and others are just okay, this is a very dystopian future. I don't want a robot there. So it's I think there's a kind of a division on how do we feel about these things. But something that's probably worth talking about. Oh yeah, and then another thing, I also had in one presentation an image of future called virtual stupidity, which is more focused on virtual worlds, but it's the idea that virtual worlds become so kind of let's say addictive, or that we prefer to be in virtual worlds and not to interact with humans, because we're always vulnerable when we are interacting humans in real time. So there is this kind of the physicality is part of it, and the real time is part of it. Virtual world is in that sense more kind of safe, and thus might be better, and kind of, and then the argument goes that okay, then we will just kind of devolve into beings that spend their all the time in virtual worlds, etc.
What has happened to the virtual worlds? They were very popular like 5, 6, 7 years ago, but now I don't hear much about those anymore. So has the interest gone away, or?
I think it's moved to mixed reality and augmented reality more.
Mm.
It's a good question. It's not.
It's partially mainstream now, so not so much talked about, but I think it's still there.
Yeah. Also, there's an argument
the hype is gone.
That these goggles, we are evolutionary coded against these things that prevent our eyesight. So we don't feel comfortable being in with basically a blindfold on, which might also be why the augmented and mixed reality is more interesting, where you can still see things.
Mm. This solitary person losing herself in virtual world, that's an Arthur C. Clarke novel, as you probably know. So this science fiction seems to be anticipating some, perhaps shaping some of the discussion that we are now having, of course, and that's why it was written in the first place. So
yeah,
it seems to work pretty well.
Actually, that's already true. There was today or yesterday a newspaper article about there's a generation of young men who rarely leaves their room. They are just playing and being online and communicating online, and the only reason is basically for food and toilet. And then replace the food with a robot delivering it. So they are already living in confinement of one room.
Yeah.
And that's kind of social problem.
The Finnish army want those guys now.
Yeah.
Change that they are really hiring, or they are looking for those guys. That was, I think, quite recent news. Future war.
I think it's fairly clear that the most strongest existing type of virtual worlds where people are actually spending time and almost living are multiplayer games. I mean,
Yes.
But how is the dating, like Second Life? I guess Second Life is still running, but there's no other ones around, or how is it? How do you see that? Like
Yeah, I don't know.
Tinder is much easier.
Okay. Well. Okay, so it could be, that might be answer that Tinder has replaced the virtual. Yeah, that could be.
Yeah, there's a research project there.
Yeah.
Actually, it's already been researched that young generation, they are kind of living in multi-tenancy life. They are interacting in multiple social networks and platforms and apps and using multiple channels. So I think people in Second Life are the ones who got stuck there.
That's true.
And that comes back to this more creative and playful way of using these things, and that may be the salvation of humanity, that we beat the robots by being a bit more creative in combining and mixing up and breaking the rules and whatever it takes. But we'll see.
So from a fable to a myth, which I also mentioned briefly, about this kind of, what do we assume about the worker? You assume it to be very kind of self-guided and proactive, and you can have kind of two views on it, more Giddinsian, kind of more individualistic view of actor and structure, which basically is just it's just a mindset change, that we just need to change our mindset, and then we'll be able to function fluently in this new work. The other more relational view, based more on Latour, etc., is this that actually what do we mean by this self-guidedness? That what are the degrees of freedom that a worker can take, and how much does the platform and the network actually state what you have to do in this new type of work? So is it kind of guided self-guidedness or restricted self-guidedness? Also, I mentioned this, that we don't, in future work, we don't actually say that what are we doing, probably because we don't know that much. Perhaps because we think that, okay, all the kind of production will be automated, or I don't know what's kind of behind that. But basically, is that okay? There's just this idea that we will solve problems, and that's the industry of the future. And also, what we don't say is that, okay, who actually pays for us to solve these problems? Who is kind of on the customer side? This might be, I don't know, this might be trivial, but these are some things that are just not, these are not discussed in when talking about future work. Finally, some policy actions, and this is now based on an ongoing project that is a kind of background study for the second part of the government report on the future, which focuses on what do we actually need to do, what kind of policy actions do we need. And what we've done there is that we've tried to create these hypotheses of different actions, and based on that, okay, this kind of thing happens, what needs to be done, and what are the assumed implications on it. And this is still very much ongoing, but the idea is to bring the more structure to the discussion and bring the discussion to the kind of on the value level. But some thoughts. One is that if we take this, that there will be different types of organizations, and there will be self-organizing organizations, etc. There will probably be hierarchical organizations still, because sometimes it really makes sense that it's better. But sometimes another type might be good. But what does it mean for these work agreements? Basically, what we are suggesting is perhaps this local level agreements and flexible agreements might be better. Then another is this that, as Martti mentioned, that if we use algorithms and robots not to replace us, but as a kind of a companion, we gain a lot of new skills by using technology, which means also that some skills are democratized. Taxi driver doesn't need to know every street now when you have GPS, for example. But then again, some tasks might be replaced also by algorithms. What this leads to is that you need to shape the current jobs, because they might not be replaced, but some tasks might be replaced of the job. For example, as a researcher, I do, let's say, literature review. What if I have an AI, for example, the iris.ai that does the literature review for me, and then I just kind of carry on from there. So there's one task that's gone away. Do I take another task from somewhere else? Also, what was interesting was I recently listened to a podcast that talked about climate change and the future work. and they were talking about hybrid work, that you're both a researcher and a farmer, because farming has to be on a more, let's say, human level when we don't have any fossil fuels for tractors, etc. There are also other types of that you combine, for example, elderly care with some other knowledge work. And just on Tuesday, I listened to one presentation by eWork company, and they have an example of basically a Java coder who's also a Norwegian lamb farmer. There's a kind of a hybrid work, and you kind of can balance these when you don't have Java coding. You can more tend to your sheep or something. I don't know if that's a very good kind of a balance, but but we don't know much about this job shaping yet. So we probably need more research on the topic, and then just sharing good practices. This we talked about, do we need a third category? Or do we need more categories for workers? Or should we just give up on any kind of categorizing? And this is largely a legislative problem, because the whole legislation is based on the work legislation on these two categories.
So are Uber drivers entrepreneurs or employees?
Yeah, exactly. Related question is taxation. An argument goes like that we used to tax things. It's useful to tax things that stay in the country. So work used to be something that usually stays in the country. Not necessarily anymore in gig economy, or if it's very much on knowledge work on digital platforms, you can do it from wherever. And you can even have a kind of e-residency, and it doesn't really even have to be where. You can be physically somewhere else and still be kind of virtually somewhere in another country.
Isn't that rather common already in some jobs?
Yeah. So, but I think now, well, the taxation office has been very interested in the how should they rethink these taxation processes, and can they somehow use the digital tools in taxation? And I think the Finnish tax authority is rather on the map in this regard. Another thing is then that we can use also the taxation to guide the development, of course, from moving away from fossil fuels, but also in taxing some forms of work and not others if we want to. So it's also a kind of a tool to guide the development. Okay, those were the kind of the. We have some more, but those were the ones that were most relevant for this. This is the project Tulevaisuuden tahtotila, the common vision for the future of work, and it's until the end of March. So the beginning of next year we should have some more results. And of course, this is largely based on the platform value now. And there's the website where you can find more signals and viewpoint posts and all of the research articles. Okay, thanks. So any questions?
I had one question regarding related work. So are you familiar with the work of Vili Lehdonvirta in Oxford Internet Institute, the iLabor work?
Yeah.
Because that's about Billy's with an ERC grant now looking into more sort of these micro work, micro tasking platform, online platforms where people are doing these small tasks. But then the question is, well, what regulations, what kind of labor movements, how do these people actually consider themselves as active participants also via the platforms?
Yeah.
And I think it's quite relevant.
Yes,
to,
yes, it is. Yeah, we have been I was very impressed by Billy's earlier work already on when we think about people working through platforms, we think that okay, they're individuals, but Billy had a research that showed that okay, there's an individual at the kind of the front end of the platform and gains a kind of reputation, and then actually does the other people do the job tasks. So for especially in micro work platforms where the reputation is very valuable, and then the guy just checks that okay, is this a good quality work? Can I submit it as my own work?
Kind of micro
So there's a whole
emerge.
kind of a network and other economy behind the platform. That was interesting, and also this whole labor. If you have a good answer for because I've been presenting to labor unions as well. If you have a good answer for them, they are asking what should they do now? What is the role of labor unions in the future? I think that's a very good question. I don't have an answer.
Somehow continue that a bit. That work can be distributed in many different countries, and I just see that it is a mission impossible for the Finnish tax authority to do anything, or to solve it in a meaningful manner. Or it's getting, the borders don't matter anymore, and so is there any way of how do we solve this?
Well, one thing is that you don't tax work.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So
Exactly.
you tax some other things that stay more in the country. So that would be more, let's say, physical assets or
Physical
something.
consumption.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that will be a big social issue, of
Yeah.
course. Yes. You want us to stop?
There's a polite way. Let's wrap up.
Let's wrap up the tape, the recording, because I think we are reaching some physical limits. But I don't want necessarily us to stop questioning. But let's now give a big hand to Mikko anyway to have a nice rounding.